Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is our first December MBF Plus event. It is in partnership with Fact and Fiction Books in Missoula, Montana. My name is Lauren Korn. I am the director of the Montana Book Festival, and I'm so excited to welcome Richard Manning and Rick Bass here tonight. This is actually a follow-up conversation to a conversation that Dick had with Joey Paxman of PM Press, the publisher of the book, during September's virtual events. So we're happy to be welcoming Dick back into the virtual space. I have a little bit of housekeeping before we begin tonight. Everyone registered tonight, and there is quite a few of you out there, will be entered into a raffle to win a free copy of If It Sounds Good, It Is Good. And I will get back onto social media and the email. I will be announcing the winner tomorrow. So look out for that. And I'm also really pleased to tell you that our author and our forward writer, Dick and Rick, will be signing copies of this book as well. So if you purchase the book through Fact and Fiction, you'll get a signed copy with both autographs, a little something extra. Christmas is just right around the corner, so this would make a great gift. And then finally, regarding this conversation, if you have any questions for either Dick or Rick, you can submit your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. We will be monitoring the chat as well, and please feel free to have conversations in the chat. But if you could relegate your questions specifically for our authors to the Q&A, that makes it a little easier for them during the conversation. And this is going to be a conversation. It's going to be equal parts Richard Manning and Rick Bass, and it's going to be amazing. And so with that, I would like to introduce them to you. If they want to pop up on the screen for me. Richard Manning is a lifelong journalist, the author of 11 books. He is a contributing editor for Harper's Magazine, was a John S. Knight Fellow in Journalism at Stanford University, and has received many awards, especially in environmental journalism. His book, One Round River, was named a Significant Book of the Year by the New York Times, and his work was featured in Best American Science and Nature Writing of 2010 and Best American Travel Writing of 2017. Rick Bass is a writer and environmental activist. Rick won the Story Prize for books published in 2016 and for his collection of new and selected stories, For a Little While. He was a finalist for the Story Prize in 2006 for his short story collection, The Lives of Rocks. He was a finalist for the 2008 National Books Critics Circle Award in autobiography, for Why I Came West. He was also awarded the General Electric Younger Writers Award, a Penn Nelson Algren Award Special Citation for Fiction, and a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. Welcome, Dick and Rick. Thank you so much for coming into this space tonight.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
All right. I got to point out, people have probably noticed where Rick is right now. I'm going to let him explain that, what he's doing there, but I don't want people to think that the writing business has gotten so bad he's got to live in his car. But he went above and beyond the call there to show up. Where are you, Rick?
I'm outside the hospital in Libby, which has the best bandwidth in the county. Up in the Yak, it would have been excruciating. A lot of frozen pictures and worse frozen audio. So, yeah, sorry about the interrogatory quality of my overhead dome light, but
well, okay, this is going to be interesting, but that is really above and beyond the call to drive down to the hospital to do this thing.
Well, it's cold up here, and I may have to turn the car on and warm my feet up. So I hope that doesn't mess up the audio. Maybe I can mute when I do that. Yeah.
As I understand, your internet connection up there is 2 tin cans and a string.
It's yeah, and it's the string is frayed. Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining me, and thanks for the help with the book and the help through all the years with this. This is going to be a fun conversation because both Rick and I have looked at this subject of music in different directions and so forth, and it's been an interesting process. And it's interesting the way it informs our writing, and maybe we can start by talking about that a little bit. I used a quote in the book that is usually ascribed to Elvis Costello, And I don't know if he did it or not, but nonetheless, you said writing about music is a little bit like dancing about architecture. Which tells us it's a hopeless cause, but we did it anyhow. What does that say to you, Rick? And why did you venture across that hopeless cause and try that?
I think what's maddening when you talk about writing or about music, you end up using abstractions. I mean, that great William Carlos Williams quote, "No ideas, but in things." And music, as some of your chapters so beautifully capture the context, the vibratory receipt of the gift of the created, made music. You feel it in your bones, you feel it in your muscles. It becomes you. It's a gift from the generator, from the creator of that music. Uh, Writing is a poor second place to that. It's it's runner up to that primal connection. But I think that's what writers and musicians are trying to do is get something out of them and into somebody else. I mean, that's the procreative, generative spirit. You talk later in the book, such an incredible book as all of them are, all of your books are. I mean, you get into conservation biology and evolutionary advantages and selection and then shit. I'm giving away the end.
That's all right. You don't have to buy it now.
So the Costello quote. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's an expression of something that's probably a little shocking for everybody listening to us right now, because we're supposed to be celebrating books, but both of us are at this moment admitting to a certain amount of musician envy, that what they do is kind of cooler than what we do, and in some ways that's true, and that there's great power in music that we wish we could summon. Let me think about it in a really prosaic way or a mundane way. I mean, I've had the experience of playing publicly, playing music in bars and things like that. And if I get the rhythm just exactly right in a blues tune, I'll look across the room and I'll see a group of people standing at the bar start shaking their butts. And what that says to me is I can move a person's body just with getting the rhythm right in the music. I can't do that with prose in any way that I can imagine. And that's really what got me started thinking about this, that enormous power. But as we investigate that power goes very deep. I mean, and there have been research on it. People have done the work and done the brain work and things like that, and said that an infant can understand a flatted third, a minor third in a chord, and will have an emotional response to that. People from any culture will have an emotional response to that flatted third, that simple change of a note. I can't do that with a line of prose. And so, okay, let's see what they can teach us.
Yeah, no, I mean, you hear the word ascribed to musicians, virtuous or virtuosity, and yeah, I mean, not to beat ourselves up too much as writers, but the comparison, it is architecture and dance. It is apples and oranges. I mean, are you kidding? Iambic pentameter, it's a fucking, excuse me, it's a damn waltz. It's like A B A B A B A B A B done, and that's what we call rhythm or meter, in literature. That's our fastball is A B A B.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no comparison. I feel fortunate to be a writer. Later in the book, you were asking about you have this. I mean, all the chapters are beautiful. I mean, you could pick this book up and start reading, even though there's a very structured progression throughout. You could dive into any chapter and be hypnotized. The chapter I'm thinking of right now is where you've got Stabrod in Cold Mountain coming in injured and healing, and then another chapter you talk about the wipeout rate of musicians, the alcohol and substance abuse and poor life choices and such that outcompetes writers yet once again. And I think it comes back to that question of virtuosity. Like, it's as hard as writing is, I do believe it's easier to write well than it is to make great music. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, exactly so. And what got me involved in that line of thinking was the discipline that goes with music. And it's a practice. Musicians talk about, well, I got to go practice today. And they don't mean they're just going through the motions of making that sound. What they're doing is going to a different place in their brain, very much like a Buddhist monk would go into meditation and call it the same word, practice. It is practice, and you're going to do that. And it's that rigor, that discipline, that playing scales day after day that eventually liberates your brain to do marvelous things. And so those things seem contradictory in some ways. It seems not the way to creativity at all, to be so rigorous and so formed as you are in music, but that's how you get there. And we've kind of forgotten that in our culture generally, not just in music, that we think that we can check boxes. We can go to school and, hey, I did that class and so forth, so therefore I know everything there is to know about it. And that's really not how we compile wisdom. And so it's really musicians telling us, no, you're going to have to do wisdom here. And a certain amount of that involves rigor and discipline, just like it does in writing. It does the same thing, same way.
Yeah. I mean, I know that you have so many musicians that you admire for different reasons. Would you share some with us, like who, almost kind of an all-star lineup? You know, who do you love for songwriting? Who do you love for rhythm? Who do you love for, for what?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And in fact, the ones I share in the book are not well known. And that was a conscious choice. I mean, because I was really interested in that tier of musicians that settles just below the rich and the famous. Because I think that they're doing more interesting work in a lot of ways. They're more dedicated to it, and they haven't been corrupted by celebrity, which is what happens in our culture. When you become famous, then you no longer can be creative in the same way you were before. It's as a result. And so I spent a lot of time with those musicians. And the truth is, I mean, if I cut to the chase here, I did that because they're interesting people. I mean, as writers, we don't have anything interesting to say ourselves. We go along and we hang out with other people. At least I don't. I hang out with other people and they tell me interesting things and I write those things down and put them in a book. That's how it goes. And it turns out that group of musicians I was talking about, and I introduce a few of them in the book, are some of the most interesting people I know. So it was just an excuse to hang out with interesting people for a long time. And there are gatherings of them that I go to periodically, where there'll be 200-300 amateur musicians around playing music all day, every day for hours on end, or at least before the pandemic, that's what we used to do. And those are the most fascinating experiences of my life. So I feel almost like a cheat here. As a journalist, I found this mother lode of character and I went out and mined that and did it. But to get back to your question of people I really admire, as in the people who are famous, known, and I do, there are some of those. I joke all the time that there's no reason for a singer-songwriter anymore, that all the great songs have already been written and we don't have to do singer-songwriters, and we just have to keep doing the material. And it is kind of a joke, and I allow many exceptions for that. So people like Gillian Welch, for instance, I am just fascinated by her and her work. I think it is fascinating. I'm a longtime Dylan devotee. I mean, and I'm not alone in that. There are a bunch of scholars who follow his work and say he has a whole lot to tell us, and I listen to that. But some of the greats, Reverend Gary Davis, Mississippi John Hurt, you can go back and then Woody Guthrie, people like that. The usual suspects in American roots music were profound human beings. They really were. And so I celebrate those people, and part of the attraction of American roots music is understanding those characters in some way.
Kind of jumping, a question I've been wanting to kick around with you is, nobody knows what the future looks like. A lot of people are talking about, I don't know. I think I'm just assuming that you and I share a brain that when we come through the winter and spring, things will not be the same. We won't get vaccinated and be back to how we were. We won't get herd immunity and be back to how we were. And that's maybe the only blessing I can see in this shit show,
Yeah.
uh, bloodletting, this genocide. Uh, uh, yeah, how what are artists? What do you see if you look ahead? I don't think any of us are looking ahead, but if I ask you to look ahead, what what do you see out in that landscape?
Yeah, we've retreated into ourselves for a long time now. I was getting ready to talk here tonight, and I said, I feel kind of like the Tin Man here, that I'm going to need some coal and stuff so I can start talking because I'm all seized up and I've forgotten my words and words because we don't get out and perform, and that seems like an odd thing for a writer to say, but it turns out we're performers too, in some ways, and that informs our writing by getting out in audiences, not sitting in our cars talking to our computers, as some people are forced to do. But in a lot of ways, it's valuable that retreat into ourselves, and musicians are really feeling it right now. I have friends who are not only musicians but who sell musical instruments, for instance, and they can't keep them in stock. People are buying musical instruments like crazy because they have this head time where they're sitting in their houses and learning to play. And that's one step into what I talk about in the book, is that music teaches us what is really valuable in our lives. And this great threat that faces it, and the necessity of retreat that we have right now, is combining to make us really understand what matters, the bedrock values in our lives. And we are going to hold these things to be far more precious than we did in the past. And so when we can sit down and play again in a group of 4 or 5 musicians, that's going to be nirvana. And I mean, everybody's looking forward to that day, and musicians I know look forward to that day above all else. And that's all that's saying, is to the larger public, is that we need each other as humans, and we have forgotten that. We have retreated into a virtual world, and we think that's good enough for the world we're in, when in fact it's not. It's depriving us of our humanity and locking us in our cars.
That's so beautifully said. I mean, you don't amaze me anymore, but you still do. I mean, yeah, no, withdrawing into ourselves. I mean, what we're hungry for, it's like some biblical parable or some myth. We don't want to be in the atom center and see with 10,000 other people, whatever big show is coming to. That's not what we're hungering for. We're hungering for that three or four person intimate sound of hearing music being made and given to us and absorbing it, feeling it live. And that's what the musicians are hungry for. They're not hungry for the big shows. They're hungry for the small venues. We're not hungry for, a big crowded restaurant. We're hungry for maybe one meal prepared by an expert
Yeah.
chef at some table with some space, but not alone, but not distant. I mean, that's how we evolved as hunter gatherers in these small bands and clans and tribes, and that's what's being hammered, by something above down onto us back to that template, and
Yeah.
we're biologically starving for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that really takes me back into kind of the foundation of the book, the biological foundation of the book in some ways, because there's this not raging, but it's a controversy among anthropologists about the role of music, where it come from. We know that humans have been making music as long as there have been humans. In other words, for 50,000 years, we've been doing this thing. And anthropologists are of 2 schools of thought. That one will say, well, language came first, and music was this thing that we invented later as kind of a frill, an add-on. And the other school says, no, music came first. And that it was the foundation, and our language was just kind of a poor substitute, but we needed music to not only communicate deeply with each other, but communicate with other species. So we can do this sing-song voice with a bear, and the bear understands what we're doing, or a dog, certainly, certainly with infants. So that kind of thing. But why we needed that was our cohesion. And there was one scholar who said that music is necessary because it helps us overcome the solipsistic divide, that we are going to retreat in our own brains if we don't have music. And that's what we're being told right now, that we are retreating into our own brains, and we don't like it very much. We would much rather, but we were doing that before. I mean, people are thinking that a text message is a good substitute for a conversation. It's not. It's not even close. And because we have been deprived of all those things and forced to talk to each other on our computers all the time, we're understanding that no, this is dehumanizing. And in fact, what we gave up in music was dehumanizing, and we can't do that any longer. We need to reclaim our humanity from this.
Yeah. Wow. One.
Yeah. Hey, I want to ask you about the performing thing, because and it occurred to me as I was thinking about that musicians missing performing, and people don't think of writers the same way. They think of writers as being somewhat monastic, and they sit in their warren and they write their words and they send them off. But in fact, we're missing performing too. Have you felt that? What do you think about that?
Wow. I'm pretty solipsistic. I enjoy it, but I don't miss it. I enjoy performing or giving or presenting to living humans. I mean, yeah, it's a biological stimulus. And I mean, that post performers, not high or low, just that you're off in another place because you've given so much. And it's good for you to give. It's good for the body feels good when it's given. It's there's an evolutionary, payback feedback thing on it. And so people call it a high. I don't think of it as a high. It's just, it's kind of like the runner's thing. You've just done, you've done it. So it's stimulating and good. I'm such a wonk. I just love diving down into the page with my own demons and self, and that's where the battle is won and lost every day. And I already know, at this late stage of the game, if I've competed honorably or gotten my ass kicked each day. So I miss it. I miss it for different reasons than maybe I think other people miss it. I don't need it, but yeah, it's feels good. Yeah, I mean an intimate human connection, but I don't need it for my craft. I don't think, if that makes sense.
And I'm not sure I need it necessarily, but it helps. And so it's such a it's such a lonely enterprise in a lot of ways, and I like that. I like being a hermit. So I just call it social distancing now. I used to call it being a hermit, but it's the same drill, essentially, and then that's how we live our lives. But I always look forward to completing the book, and then going out to local bookstores with 30, 40 people and sit down and read for a half hour and then talk to them, because that was the feedback I needed in some way. And I mean, I didn't need a feedback in terms of, well, you did a good job, that kind of thing, but more in how do people think about what I write? And how does their thinking and their conversation tell me what that book became when it was turned loose on the public in some ways?
Yeah, and I think that's yeah. I don't art. No, comparison is the thief of joy. So I don't want to compare my response to yours. I do know what you're describing, but
Yeah.
And I like it when I feel that way. Yeah.
Well, there's a kind of a subset of that thought that I got involved with when I was thinking about music in some ways and why music works differently than writing, or did work differently, and now it works the same in a sense, because and it's what we call, among musicians, they'll call it the folk process. And what they'll say, what that meant is you just made a mistake, or you played the song differently than what they learned that song, and that's the folk process. What that means is the song is an alive thing, and it's constantly being recreated every time somebody plays it. And they change it. They change it in very different ways. And so if we go back before recording and before radio, that's the way all music was written. There was no such thing as a songwriter. Somebody came up with a tune and people took a hold of it and started playing it and replaying it and replaying it and reinventing it every time they played it. And that was an evolutionary process. It looks very much like evolution. In other words, survival of the fittest. If a verse is fit and a tune is fit, it survives and it's recreated with each generation. And and if we think about it, that's the way our literature began as well. I mean, so our great classics like the Odyssey,
Odyssey, yeah.
yeah, are oral tradition. They even have similarities to blues music, and they use repetitive phrases to fill in rhythmic lines the same way, exactly the same way blues music does,
In
because they
Canterbury.
were meant to be performed.
Yeah.
And that was the process that kept things alive and organic almost in terms of evolution. And when we claim, we authors claim authority over what we've written, then it's dead on the page, and it doesn't exist with people any longer and being retold and reimagined the way it used to be. And I wonder about that, about what we've lost as a result of that.
It's fascinating. I mean, you've got me thinking a little deeper now about what do I feel, in a performance, and I think I am aware that in a good story, you are lost in it. You are giving it to the audience. It's not yours. You're not manipulating it or controlling it. You're just conveying it. You're sharing it. You're shepherding it, caretaking it, stewarding it, whatever, transferring it, the conduit, the conveyor. Um, but what I really like after an intense performance is so yeah, that's a positive. That's a cool thing. But what I just feel such a crashing wave relief when we get to the Q&A, where I can come back to being not lost in the medium, not lost in the story, but back to, you know, it's scary out there. For me, it's scary out there. And I wonder if it's that way. I'm not a musician. I don't even know musical terms. So what's it like when you're creating music and it's going out to people? What's it like when it ends?
Well, far and away my most frightening experience. I mean, I can, I routinely talk and give speeches and lectures and so forth to groups of, several hundred people. No problem. I'll walk out cold, no notes, and just sit there and deliver it. And I'm fine with that. When I'm going to play for a group of 10 people and sit down and play a song, I'm a nervous wreck. And it took me a very long time to control that. I suffer terrible stage fright. And and I know a lot of professional musicians who suffer terrible stage fright. And it's like, well, why do you do this? You're torturing yourself with this horrible anxiety. And well, they're compelled to do it somehow. But there's something about it that is profoundly upsetting, and just it took me years to overcome that stage fright so I could actually play. And you think if I had any sense at all, I'd just give up and go back to writing in my little warren and not venture out there and try to play a guitar in front of people. But for some reason, I couldn't give up, and I had to keep at it until I could overcome that and play. Strange experience. I mean, you've done actually some performance work with musicians, right?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I've done performance with musicians. Yeah, no, Stella Rondo. I mean, Gibson and
Yeah.
Caroline and Jeff and Travis and Bethany. Yeah, it was a really uh, rough. I hate it when people say a rough spot. It was a rough time in my life. It was a hell of a lot longer than a spot. It was just a rough life, and I fell in with them. They were saying, we want to, she's incredibly talented, virtuous, and creative musicians, and they said we want to compose, score some music with you reading stories. Do you want to do that? And they were just nice people, so I couldn't tell them no. I thought it was the worst idea I ever heard of. We've all been subjected to those coffee shops where the guy with the goatee is beating on the bongo drums while his girlfriend reads really bad poetry, and you can't hear the poetry. That's the blessing, but you wish you couldn't hear those bongos uh, so that's what I thought they were asking about. But I went and hung out with them in their backyard while they would just be throwing out chords and tunes and progressions and melodies, and it was just viral. It just got in me and made me feel better. I didn't. It was just it was a great act of mercy just to be feeling low and bad and just have these fragments, these again viral threads of sound that they were curating for something that you had created. It was the most artistically rewarding thing I've ever done, and also just emotionally and physically healthy. Yeah, it was sweet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I understand that. I have the same kind of feelings about it. We have some questions from some of the listeners here, so let's walk into those. Alan Durning checked in. Haven't heard that name in a long time. Good to have Alan there. It says, "Does studying and performing music make you a better writer?" I think we've been talking a little bit about that. You want to hit that some more?
You go, Dick.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it really does, and it has to do with that element of practice that I talked about earlier. That commitment to rigor. I mean, and it's just really there. You're just going to have to do it, and sometimes it's a push to go and do it. But once I get over that hump, then uh, it turns out that it's very much like I talked about the analogy to Buddhist practice. It's like you haven't really lived your day until you've done your writing, and that's not a necessity. That's something you want to do. You know, it's not a burden. It's something that you organize your day with, and you understand that that's you're living now when you're doing that.
Yeah, and to follow up with that, I don't study or write music, but I do. Whenever I'm with musicians, I feel like I've been studying it a little bit or learning a little bit, and I mean, I can't get in their minds or bodies, but knowing them for a good long time now, they seem like writers in the what you're referring to, Dick. Um, like when you're a writer, when you're writing and you know, you're deep in writing. It doesn't matter if you had a good day or a bad day. The practice is. I feel more sometimes gratified by a really crappy day
Yeah.
where I don't lose my shit. I don't freak out. I just think, wow, that's interesting. Okay, how do we correct that? How do we solve that problem? And that's generative. That's creative. So I really kind of, I don't know if it's that way for musicians, but it kind of sounds like it is. As long as you're practicing, you don't freak out over, you know, a quote mistake. It's something to work with.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that. And I don't care how musicians feel about it. I'm glad to hear you say it because I feel the same way, and I feel a little perverse because I feel the same way, but I do. You know, it's a crappy day is fine with me. That's just part of the process. Alan also asked if we listen to music while we're writing, and what genres. And I can answer that one real quickly. Absolutely not. I do not listen to anything. I'm writing complete silence.
Yeah, when I was a young writer, I would listen to the uh, wonderful George Winston, but it got to be too. I wanted to be writing. I didn't want George Winston to be writing, and so yeah, no, I wouldn't dream of listening to music while I'm working. Um, here's kind of a weird thing, Alan and Dick. I'm not proud to acknowledge this, but um, I'm not listening to as much music now as I used to. And I'm really craving, you know, live music, but I'm not listening to as many CDs, and uh, I still enjoy mixing, uh, you know, songs and tapes for people, but I don't. I spend more quiet time alone. I think it's that withdrawing. I'm getting sucked down into it. Yeah, and I'm aware of it. And I'm not. I don't think it's really a healthy thing, but it is. It's a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and here's a little something I figured out about musicians after a long time of spending a long time with them. They don't listen to music all that much either, recorded, because it's just not the same, and so it leaves them feeling empty, and they want to hear the real thing. And that's especially true of CDs. And this is a little interesting sidelight, but there was a field years ago called musical therapy, and people would actually use music to help people who had psychological problems. And they would use records and let them listen to the music and then talk to them afterwards. And that worked pretty well. And then it stopped working when they started using CDs.
Wow.
Same music. And because there's so much of what's interesting about music is missing from a CD. It's part of what I talked about, the virtual world, and how much we've given up by that. Joey Paxman also checked in with a question. He said, the book was released during an interesting time of pandemic, of course, but also during an era of mass demands for racial justice. Your book actually provides something of an alternative history of U.S. race relations. Please talk about how music is an oral history and why it might do a better job of explaining who we are as a country. And Joey kind of knows that I got drawn into that in a strange way because for me, the first attraction to music was it provides an alternate history of the United States. I listen to American music, American roots music, and if you listen to it long enough, you can compile a story that is every bit as good as the histories that we're given in textbooks and so forth. And you cannot ignore racism in that story. It is through and through racist, and it's and we know the role that African Americans have played in devising roots music and giving us what was roots music. We also know the roles the Irish have played in the same thing, and it's actually the poorest working people gave us our best music in a lot of ways, but they also gave us a story at the same time. They told their stories. And those stories became encoded in really profound ways that is a separate body of literature. And that's really my primary attraction to it. And there's a lot of stuff in there that's interesting. And I think that we can confront our past there. There's a group around now that, in fact, they actually played in Missoula some years ago, but actually got quite famous. And it's called the Carolina Chocolate Drops. And there are middle-aged African-American people, great musicians, who do minstrel music. And minstrel music was horribly racist. It was god-awful, and it was also the rage. Everybody during the 19th century adored minstrel music. And they're resurrecting that, and they're playing with fire by doing so. But they're saying that, no, by resurrecting this, we're beginning to understand something of our history, especially Reconstruction. And when there are songs, there are songs in especially the old time vein, like there's a song that's about night riders and Ku Klux Klan and lynchings. It's all there, and people sang about it. They played banjos and sang about it. They sang about assassinations of presidents. They sang about one of my favorite songs of all time is about it's called Delia. And it's about a 12-year-old prostitute in Savannah, Georgia, who was shot and killed in 1901 by her 14-year-old boyfriend. I mean, you get a story like that, and you understand how lives were lived then, and they're very different, very different. And we need to be exposed to that history. So that's my answer to that. Colleen Stone, she happens to be my niece. See, that's good. You can check in with your relatives on Zoom occasionally. You're not the first pair of writers to praise another medium. Is this because you hit the edges of what you feel writing can do and get frustrated or envious? Why don't you deal with that one, Rick?
Sure. I'd like to, I mean, it sounds like denial, so I have to check myself. I want to blur it out. I don't feel envious, but that was an awfully quick answer, Rick. Are you sure? But I'm not aware of feeling envy. Just it makes me feel good. Yeah, it makes me feel. It does feel like therapy. Music does. And because I have no. Let me flip the question. Is it Colleen?
Yeah, Colleen.
Colleen Stone. Flip the question as Tracy would. Does reading a book make you want to be a writer? Not always. I mean, like sometimes we just read for pleasure. I do think there's a perverse, dangerous connection between reading and writing. I think most writers were moved by some great book, some great piece of writing, and I don't understand why that switch goes off. Like, if a book moves you so powerfully, why wouldn't it just compel you to read more and more and more? Why do you have to quit a good thing and go off and attempt a thing that, as you intimate with your question, Colleen, is going to lead you to frustration? I don't know the answer for that. Why that happens, Dick? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at when I talked about authors and authority, that our culture is weird in that we identify with the person who creates or does these things. And in music, it shows up all the time when people say, well, I can't sing, I'm not good enough. And it's kind of like what you're talking about. Why don't you just read it for the pure pleasure of it, as opposed to wanting to be a writer or something like that. And it's by making celebrity and making people stand out for doing music, and by making professional writers, professional musicians, we've forgotten that this is just a normal human enterprise that we do every day among each other. We used to tell stories around the dinner table, right? And that's storytelling, and that's completely valid. We need those stories. I mean, and so the envious thing, the envy of any practitioner is probably counterproductive. What you need to do is just say, what do I take from this? Very much like you answered in reading. And what does this do for my life? How does this make me more human? That's the goal here. We don't want to be writers and musicians. We want to be humans. And we think our humanity can be taken for granted. It certainly cannot. It's certainly not in modern times, that we have to fight for our humanity every day.
Here's kind of a non sequitur to this conversation. Reading, writing, musicians, and the silos that we're in. Hopefully, hopefully there's a connection across, but hopefully we can just sit afar and be grateful for the others' talents. What about letter writing? I just, it's such a fascinating phenomenon to me to go back and see historical letters, from two brothers writing each other, or a mother and a daughter, or whomever, and you see this incredible passion and no small amount of skill and ability to communicate. I mean, they got down to business in their letters back in the old day with hand on parchment and stuff. And I don't know, you think that'll come back after we get on the other side of this stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we have the skill level to bring it back. And that's what always strikes me about reading those collections of old letters, is they were good writers. I mean, the average guy in the street was a good writer. And that soldier writing home, a 22-year-old kid, great writer.
Mm.
And they did it well. And it was the same with music, that people used to play music a lot in the house. Every house had a piano. People were educated in music. And there was one collector who went in about 1910, went looking for songs to collect them in Appalachia. And he collected something like 2,000 songs from people in an area the size of Missoula. I mean, you couldn't find 2,000 independent songs in Missoula any longer. And it's because they performed them, they sang them. The people he talked to, he went from house to house and got these songs that way.
I remember you writing like one summer, just in one summer, he went and gleaned all that.
Yeah. Cecil Sharp was the guy's name, but Brett. And he just was astounded by it. He neglected to go to any house where there were black people, where he probably could have got even more better songs, but that's the way it worked out. Jenny Merriam checks in too. She says, please talk about how the idea for this book emerged and coagulated. I don't know, coagulated. And then how you decided on its structure, which is unconventional, but winds up being absorbing for the reader. It emerged in just generally out of the argument that I talked about earlier among anthropologists, saying music is not necessary. I actually did a book just before this called Go Wild, and it talked about the evolutionary conditions of humans, what we ought to do as modern humans to honor our evolution and be healthier. It's about that simple, what we should eat, how we should move, those kinds of things. And in researching that book, I kept finding all these references to music. That in evolutionary biology, there's research on music, but I couldn't fit it in that book, or I didn't quite have the answers yet, so I squirreled all that away. And then when I finished that book, I started, and that's the way all books began. They always start from the last one. And I just started asking those questions and chasing them. The unconventional structure of that book is something I'm becoming to insist on. And is what both of our mentor, I can't do that sentence right, but Bill Kittredge said a long time ago, he would criticize the story by saying, well, it's like a ball rolling down a hill. we both know what that means, and so there's a structure to a story that and now we're starting to write books like they look like PowerPoint presentations that we're going to do this geometric proof. Here's A, here's B, here's C, here's D, and we got to get through it. We got to know the narrative thread. And I think that's nonsense. I think that people learn from their peripheral vision. And so you got to constantly knock people off balance when you're writing. You got to, bring them in one direction. And when I'm teach writing, I call it the sucker punch. That I get somebody looking this way and then hit them from the other side. And that's eventually generates the structure I'm after. And so it sounds like a meander, and it was. And it's because at heart, I'm really an essayist. So each one of my chapters becomes an essay, and that's fine. And then eventually they all hang together and make it work out. So yeah, that's how that structure came about. That the short answer is through sloth and indolence, but it got there.
Instinct. Bill's got the question we've been waiting for. Show us enough with a high-minded, philosophical, intellectual discourse. Show us the hot dog. Let's see some beauty, some aesthetics.
Who had the question? Is it from Bill Lombardi?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So now, what background is necessary? I play guitar with Bill. And so he saves my ass many times, and that's what he's after. The problem is we can't play music on Zoom because it'll sound lousy. No matter how much you try to make it sound good, it's going to sound lousy. What I can do is show this guy. This is the cover of the book.
Oh my God!
And so this ends up also being a chapter in the book. And so you're talking about the structure, and I can tell how this one came about. This is a 1949 Gibson that I found essentially as a basket case. It was stuffed in some guy's closet. The back was off. It was cracked. It was ripped to shreds. And so I wrote a chapter in the book called Guitar Geek about the resurrection of that guitar. And a friend of mine here in Missoula, a guy named John Joyner, who's a very gifted musician and a very gifted luthier, spent a year putting that guitar back together. And he had to steam out every crack, put the glue out, put it back. He had to steam Bondo off it. Somebody put that stuff they used to repair car bodies. They put that guitar back together and made it work. And so it's kind of a prized possession now, as you can imagine. But there's this attraction. It's a really interesting thing that I discovered in researching the book is that our brains categorize. That's how brains work. And we're pretty good at categorization. And it turns out our brains map that categorization. In other words, a part of our brain deals with one thing and another part deals with another thing. And one of the fiercest divisions in your brain is for living things versus non-living things. And all living things exist in one part of your brain, and all non-living things are separated to another area of your brain. There are two exceptions to that the neuroscientists have found. Food and musical instruments. That we treat musical instruments as if they are living things. And of course they are to us. They really are. And every musician I know of, acoustic musician, has a profound relationship with his or her collection, and it usually is a collection of guitars and banjos and all that stuff. They're a big deal to you. But the old ones like that, like this 1949 Gibson, is such a big deal because every time you pick it up, you say, listen, pal, you got some stories. You've been places, you've seen things. You've been in that honky-tonk bar just outside of Hell in the White Night when the Cowboys were dancing in 1953. Tell me that story. Tell me that story. I know that song's in you. I know it's there.
That's, back to Colleen's question about envy. I knew I said I don't have any envy too quickly. I do, because what you're describing there, Dick, is, as we say, literally. I mean, it's a pet peeve. I hate that people use the word literally. Unless you've written it down, you can't say literally. Literally means it is written.
Yeah.
I'll use it here because as writers, we literally can't access that conduit that you just described, but the instrument does literally or acoustically hold the vibratory echoes of the experience in its body, in its vessel, as do storytellers, essayists carry their experiences and communicate them. But but it takes it takes a shitload of work for an essayist to get that experience out and communicate it um, to the audience. But if you get you get the
Uh-oh, bandwidth went to pieces in the hospital at Libby. All right, Rick is frozen up, maybe literally so. It's probably fairly cold out there. And it comes on the heels of the discussion of literal.
my internet
Oh.
connection is unstable. I could.
Well, that's appropriate. You're fairly unstable sometimes. So let's, yeah, but you know, that stuff is there for us in some ways. And that really is, to me, the attraction of the music. Now, I think about this and think about it in terms of, especially for a fiction writer. So here, one of my favorite lines from Mississippi John Hurt. Here's his line. He says, I did all I can do. I can't get along with you. I'm going to take you to your mama come payday. There it is. You know, 2 lines. You own that. I mean, you hear that and you say, I can generate a story tomorrow morning out of that thing. I can sit down and write a short story out of those lines. I just heard one, Mance Lipscomb. Mance is from your area, and you know well, from Texas. Great blues player from Texas, and he's got a song, a very simple, stark song that begins, if you see Charlie James coming down the road, don't tell him which way I've gone. Come on, you got a story there. That's a story. So that richness is available to us. And we can go mix it up with that anytime we want. And yeah, write short stories out of it, or write essays out of it, or think about it. It's not that we have to envy it, that we can celebrate it and live it, because it is a part of our legacy. And when we spend our days listening to pop music, the latest thing from celebrities or arena rock, we are really giving up our birthright. And our birthright was that legacy of music that's been handed to us over the years. And people even today, like we mentioned Gillian Welch earlier, they're mining that legacy. They just go back in and listen and listen and listen to people who wrote songs in the 1890s or 1920s or whatever, and reimagining it and giving it back to us. And that's what we do with stories and essays and everything else as well.
I apologize for my unstable internet connection. I'm starting to skip out and not hear everything. It's like it's driving me nuts. I could put it in reverse and back up into the emergency lane, but I don't think it's appropriate. Out at the outer edges, I think they start dialing down the internet strength after a certain time.
One thing I did want to talk about, Rick, or you wanted to talk about, you're actually engaging with a guitar right now as well, right? And in a really interesting way with a guy I know from Livingston. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, my God. Yeah, thanks so much for that connection. Yeah, Kevin Kopp, koppguitars.com, I think, out of Bozeman. Aesthetics and beauty. Log on to it and look at it. It's I was over Dick and Tracy's talking about this. I don't know what's going to happen to Montana. You know, we got a snootful this summer of being occupied. I guess what native folks felt like a couple hundred years ago, and it wasn't a good feeling. And anyway, at some point I was starting to get really morose, and Dick, for levity and to brighten up the mood, brought out this work of art, this guitar that Kevin had made, and was showing it to me. Just the way the light falls on it, you just want to reach out and touch it. And, yeah, Dick kind of pulled it back, like, no, don't touch it, just look at it. And look how light. Look at how he's holding it. Look at how you're holding it, Dick. It's like it's buoyant. It's helium. It's the lightest, tightest, fastest, brightest little thing that I've ever seen. And then Dick kind of brushed his fingers against it, and what came out of it was just like I've never utilized the drug ecstasy, but I read about it, and I think that's kind of what came out of those strings was ecstasy. It was just incredible. So the guy, the guitar maker, the luthier, has got a place up in the Yak, and he's been making some guitars out of old growth spruce up in the Yak, and so I went and met him through Dick's introduction and said, "Hey, if I bring out a big old chunk of spruce, will you make a guitar out of it?" And he said, "Yeah, why not?" And so we're in the middle of that process. We went into this old forest, this 800-year-old forest that the Forest Service, of course, being the Kootenai, wants to clear cut. It's the headwaters, the Yak River, and there's a big old tipped over spruce tree there. And I took my little baby chainsaw in and cut out a big old chunk and took it to Kevin, and he's going to try and see what voice that ancient forest will have. Yeah. So thank you in every direction.
Yeah, and it's great. And now you get into the depth of the musical instruments, but also that the subculture of musicians and luthiers, which we have wonderful luthiers in Montana as a result. Kevin's world class. I mean, he's known around the world as a gifted guitar maker, but it turns out you can go to almost any community in the United States, and if you know the questions to ask, you can pull up this subculture of people who are musicians or associated with music in some way and celebrating it, and they have a lot of interesting stories to tell, and it's fascinating, and they're completely unseen to mainstream culture. That's part of what I enjoyed about doing the book. We have frozen Rick again, I'm afraid.
Poor Kevin, his shop. I said, what, why are your guitars so good? And he said, I thought he was going to some geometric formula or something, or some model that he's copyrighted or something. He said, I just make them.
All right, we seem to have lost Rick. No, we got him back. Sort of. All right. Well, and one of the reasons Kevin's guitars are so good is the same reason all.
Are you back?
Yeah, we're back. I mean, most luthiers like Kevin are making guitars exactly as they were made in like 1930. That was kind of the golden era. So they're really honoring that tradition in some ways and doing new things with it as well. While we've got you here, I'm going to thank you before you freeze up one more time. We have pretty much exhausted our time.
I can't hear any.
Yeah. Don't you love technology? We'll be glad when the pandemic is over. And anyway, thanks for showing up, and thanks to Lauren for putting this event together.
Yeah, I'm sorry Rick is having some technical difficulties, but thank you both, Rick and Dick, for being here with us tonight. Such a pleasure. And thank you to everyone watching and participating with your questions. Just as a reminder, you can purchase If It Sounds Good, It Is Good on Fact and Fiction Bookstore's website, factandfictionbooks.com, pardon. And then just a reminder too, Dick and Rick will be signing copies. So grab these signed copies while you can. And I also urge you, as a representative and the director of the Montana Book Festival, to purchase Montana Book Festival merchandise at montanabookfestival.com. And while you're on our website, please donate so that we can continue our MBF Plus programming, these off-season events like this one, and our next event with C. Pam Zhang on the 17th. I really want to keep these off-season events going, so donate what you can. I will get in touch with the raffle winner tomorrow, and I think that's it. Thank you everyone for being here. Oh, Rick is back. Oh, look, there it is. You know how to make an entrance/exit, Rick.
I will see you at the Top Hat this summer, Dick. Thank you, Lauren.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.